Good afternoon. It's fantastic to be here this afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's Beyond Belief podcast. I'm really excited today to have a very special guest joining us. One of the things that we've been looking at here at Beyond Belief is the impact of a faith crisis of transition and why people leave the church through a UK context. We often hear and talk about stories from the heart of Utah, from the United States. Whilst those stories are exciting and they're interesting and they're great to learn from, living in the gospel or living in the church in the UK is a very different experience. And one of the things that we are looking to start doing, and today is the first of a series of this, is to explore that faith journey, that faith experience, and that experience of leaving the church from the context of people who live here in the UK. There are some names in the church that are really well known. If you speak to members in the church and you mention certain names, it doesn't matter where in the UK you are really, people will know who you're talking about, either directly or through association. It is one of the magical things about the size of the church here in the UK. My guest today is one of those people. If you mention his name, you are likely to know him or those people that he is associated with. My guest today is a guy by the name of Bob Bridgestock. Bob was baptised into the church in 1964. He was a member of the church down in Dartford in Kent, and he was baptised into the Dartford branch of what was then the British Mission. We weren't talking about wards, we're not talking about stakes at this time. The church was a lot smaller. Bob was active in the church for many years, and he served in various capacities. He served as a bishop, and he served in many leadership capacities in the church, and he served well. Circumstances in Bob's life led him to question his faith and his relationship with the church, and he finally left the church in 2005. Subsequent to leaving the church, Bob has become well known in the post-Mormon community and is very much loved and appreciated. In 2014, he published a book. He published a book called The Youngest Bishop in England, which accounted some of his stories and his experiences as a member of the church, as he navigated the gospel and his faith and his belief and what finally took him to leave the church. I'm really excited today to introduce Robert, or Bob as I know him, Bridgestock, who has joined us today. Bob, welcome. It is great to have you here.
Yes, good to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, it's not a problem at all. I'm really pleased that you've agreed to join us today. What I want to do, Bob, is explore a little bit this afternoon about your experiences and your background with the church, which led you to serve faithfully as you did for many, many years. I know people who still love and appreciate you and the service that you gave as a member of the church, and then perhaps explore some of the things that led you to question whether the church was a space you wanted to be and eventually leave the church. What I would say is to our audience is this isn't Mormon stories. I'm not here to do an in-depth dive of your story, although we are going to talk about a lot of your experiences today. Our stories are never our own. Stories as we grow up in the church are never individual to us. Our lives cross others. Our lives affect others. And I want to explore your experiences today, Bob, not the experiences of other people. To my audience, what I would say is if you feel there are things that Bob hasn't discussed because you happen to know him, that's great and that's fine. It's appropriate to discuss our own experiences, not to expose other people's experiences around the church and our experiences in life. And having said that, Bob, thank you for being here. Bob, I just want to start at the beginning. You say you got baptized in 1964. Can I ask why?
What was that question again? Sorry. Why did you say?
Why did you decide to get baptized? What happened that made you decide to go up to Hyde Park, get in the font, and join the church?
Yeah, that goes back to about a year before, when I was 17. For no real reason that I understand, I became religious. Now, I'm just C of E, hardly ever went to church. My parents weren't religious. But for some reason, I think what started it off is the Garner Ted Armstrong Church of Tomorrow, and they had a publication called The Plain Truth. And they used to have these magazines free to take on railway stations up in London. And when I was 15, I started a job straight away in London as an apprentice artist. So every day I'm traveling to London by train. And they also had a radio program of this particular church on the radio, and I've tuned into it. I really got fascinated by it and the second coming of Christ. It really did something for me. And so I started reading the Bible, reading this magazine, which incidentally had one or two parallels with Mormonism. Don't ask me to tell you, but I can't remember. But there were things that I thought were very similar to the teachings of the church. Anyway, time went by and I was praying for truth, literally going on my knees in the bedroom and asking God, I don't believe in the Catholics, I don't believe in the Protestants. I see divisions everywhere, a bit like Joseph Smith, I suppose, in the Grove. And I said, when I hear the truth or see the truth, please tell me. Time went by. I was sitting at work one day, and one of my colleagues said to me, because I was always, not always, but sometimes religion came up, and I was quite intolerant in those days and fairly aggressive. And sometimes there'll be arguments in the studio about religion. And of course, I'm there battling away. And somebody said, oh, what about these Mormons? And this particular guy said to me, I've got a relative in the States who tried to get me converted, and they sent me a Mormon and lots of leaflets. And he quickly told me a bit about it. And I said, oh, well, why don't you bring them in? I'll have a look. So he brought in the Book of Mormon, a few leaflets, and dumped them on me. And I took them away. And I remember reading in the studio in dinner time, everybody got out, and I was quietly reading Joseph Smith's story about his first vision. I just believed it. I just thought to it straight away. And so after a while, I started to look at the Book of Mormon and reading the first pages, and I realized that somewhere there was a contact for the British mission. So I phoned the mission home and said, can you send two missionaries to teach me? So that's how it started. So they were told to come to me. They didn't knock on my door. And I just took to it like a duck to water. It was just marvelous. I just fell in love with it. I was smoking at the time, and I've been trying in the past because I have asthma. And I couldn't stop. Suddenly, never again, just finished. And all these things like tea and coffee, tithing, no problem whatsoever. So I was fully in, fully involved, up to my neck in it. So that's the answer to
It's
that.
interesting. Really, absolutely. So really interesting that experience. I'm hearing what you're saying about asking for these missionaries sent to you, and obviously that's quite unusual. They came and they taught you. What was it about their message that really resonated? What was it that you heard about the teachings they were giving you that really resonated and made you feel, yeah, this is right?
Um, I think there's two aspects here. There's an emotional one and there's an intellectual one, or mental. The mental one was I simply believed the story. I believed the first vision. It seemed marvelous to me. And the Book of Mormon I found intoxicating and just believable. Uh, if to bear in mind, I would say, going back up further back into my childhood, my father died when I was 13, and I was poorly educated, I would say. I'd had asthma, which meant I had time off school. I also had quite a bit of eczema. I didn't get on well at school. I was always in a poor grade. And when I think about it, I I didn't have a good opinion of myself. I mean, I wasn't thinking like this when I was that age. I didn't sit around thinking, well, I'm not very clever. I just wasn't very clever. I just knew that people were better than me. Opinions, other people's opinions, ideas were always preferable to mine. And I didn't know, I didn't have the confidence to stand my ground, and so on. I also felt that because my father had died, I was, even if I didn't understand it, I was missing the father figure. And so the father figure, uh, I, Christ and his father, who could become my father, had a very powerful, comforting spiritual dimension to it. And also, I remember when I first started going to church, there was a lot of speakers from Salt Lake. I can remember being introduced at one of the big meetings in Hyde Park. Forgot who was speaking. It could have been Marky Peterson, but I was introduced to the mission president, and he came up to me.
Yeah.
He put his me. Now, people in general don't put arms around strangers. You might have your arm around you from a relative in your own family, but I felt so loved, welcome. And when people would have arms around me. So again, a feeling of being part of a bigger family, having a message, having meaning, having purpose, having a vision, having beliefs that went beyond into eternity. Very powerful stuff. But again, I felt at that age of 18 when I joined,
Yeah.
I didn't know anything. I didn't have any life experience. And I had a feeling that the world needed to be sorted out. So having desire to do missionary work and proclaim the gospel was my way of solving the world's problems because Jesus is coming again. So I took it very, very seriously.
Yeah. Okay, so a question for you there, Bob. Obviously, you joined the church in '64. I wasn't even born until 1975. I know I look far older, but I am youthful and wasn't born until 1975. So you were a member of the church 11 years before I was even born. And so as I look back,
Okay.
my memory doesn't go back that far. How big was the branch, and what was it like being a member of the church back in the '60s?
The Dartford branch, I mean, it's the same old story with branches. Um, they often had a very high membership of baptized people, probably three, three or even 500. But you probably got
Yeah,
70 people that came to church. So the rest are dead wood, as we
yeah,
call them, inactive people that never came. Of course, we had a massive mission home teaching program. People had not just one calling like you might have today in the church. We had 4 or 5 callings. You could be in young men's, you could be teaching, you could be doing missionary work with missionaries. I can remember at one point I had 5 callings. So I'm coming from a fairly leisurely 18-year-old who enjoyed walking in the woods and riding horses and seeing foxes because I love nature. And I lived on the edge of the green belt, so I could do that. To give, almost sacrificing everything, and all my time was devoted to the church. Even one calling I had, which was young man's president, I found that I actually hated the calling. I mean, I just said yes because I'm a member of God's church and you have to say yes. But I hated the calling. But just like when I was young and there was a problem at school, you didn't take the problem home and tell your parents. You felt too embarrassed. And so I never went to the branch president and said, "Oh, I don't like this," or "I've got a problem and it's getting on my nerves." I just got on with it. So I made myself do things. I forced myself to do things from week to week. And I don't mean about everything. I love teaching. I love speaking. But the social side with the young men, we used to meet in a rented hall, and it used to be visited when we had it by yachts. I mean, we'd have people coming in up the steps, up the stairs to the hall, where we were trying to do something a little serious to do with young men and young women. We'd have these guys come in, young fellows, and they weren't bad. They were kind of fascinated by what we were doing, and they wanted to join in, but they weren't members, so they didn't always respect what you were doing and didn't know how to deal with it. So there were times when I felt like it was difficult. Life was very busy in the church, very demanding, and we were out a lot. So during the week, even when I was first married and started being a bishop and so forth, you were out 3 to 4 times a week, and your wife was at home. So I would say life was very demanding of membership in those small branches. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, I can only imagine. Like I said, I wasn't alive then. I remember growing up in the 80s and my experience watching my own parents and my own family, very, very similar. I also grew up in small branches in my childhood. I'm interested in a couple of things, though, in terms of what there. Obviously, you're talking about your experience in the church, and you describe yourself as being all in and that you were serving hard, you were working hard, and it took up your life. Obviously, I'm trying to picture a 18-year-old Robert Bridgestock down in Kent, wandering around, and turning around to his mum and saying, "I'm going to be baptized into this church." What was the reaction from your family when you announced that you were going to join these Mormons? How did that go down?
Well, my my older brother was married, my older sister was married, my father was dead. It was just my twin brother who joined at the same moment, and my mother. She
Okay.
was very tolerant. She was worried. She was always worried that we were safe and that we weren't making the wrong decisions, and she didn't understand it. And we were sort of convinced it was true, to the point where we said to her one day, not immediately, "Can we read you the Book of Mormon?" She didn't want to read it. She said, "Well, if you want to." I said, "Well, we'll read a chapter a night." So every night, somewhere, we would read the chapter and we would have a prayer. She didn't say the prayer, we said it. So we would have liked our mum to join, or at least understand what we were doing. And she was kind enough or gracious enough just to listen and let us do it. She did eventually join the church, but it wasn't because she really wanted it. She was just trying to please us. And it never came to anything. She might have come once or twice, but she was getting too old in the end, too
Yeah.
elderly, too old to be bothered. So life at home was fine. With my neighbours, I've had one or two run-ins because they'd found out about it. Um, One of my best neighbours that I was friendly with, the lad there, got his name, but it doesn't matter. He used to have dogs, you see, and we never had dogs, and we used to take his dog for walks, or he will come with us and we'll go for walks. This is when we were very young. And Christmas times, we would pop in their house as a family and say hello and have a drink, and they would come to our house, not close, but just neighbourly friendly. And we went down there, they invited us down one day when we'd been baptised. And they came in with a cup of coffee. My brother and I sat in the chairs, and they brought in a cup of tea, not coffee. We didn't drink coffee then much. We held it in our hands and we said, "Oh, we don't drink tea now." And she said, "Well, why not?" And I said, "Well, as you know, we joined the Mormon Church, and we're not allowed to drink tea anymore." And they were so insulted. They took the cups away. One of the daughters took the cups, the older daughter there. She went out crying to the kitchen, saying if their father was alive, he would not have stood all this. He would have stopped it. And they asked us to leave the house. I remember walking out the house thinking, I mean, we didn't want to be thrown out, but I remember thinking, I'm happy to be persecuted for Christ. I remember for being a Mormon.
Yeah,
It doesn't bother
yeah,
me.
yeah.
If
No,
I'm going to be kicked out, kicked or whatever, okay.
yeah, I hear that. It's really interesting, actually. So, I mean, I'm sure there's more under the surface about their feelings about the church than just a cup of tea. But effectively, you were thrown out the house over a cup of tea. Yeah, really interesting for our American audience that may be listening in here. It probably sounds a bit strange that a fuss is being made about a cup of tea. And what you're not really appreciating is something about the Britishness of us. Tea is really, really important in British culture. I don't like it personally, but people who are outside of the church, if you mention that you don't like tea, they look at you funny. Particularly when you live in Yorkshire, and I know that later in your life, Bob, you moved to Yorkshire. And I think that as silly as it sounds, it's something about the culture and how we exist as members of the church that's really, really important. Um, I mean, you guys fought a war with us over tea. You threw tea off of a ship and said you didn't want to be part of the British Empire any further over in the States, and that's fine. Um, Tea is culturally a significant part, and if someone is bringing you a cup of tea, well, Bob, if someone were to offer you a cup of tea, what does that imply as someone if culturally in the UK? How important is tea and drinking tea to our society? I know that's a strange question.
Yeah, my problem is hearing what you're saying. It sounds like you're talking about the culture of the word of wisdom and how that appears to be antisocial. Now, I
Yeah,
always found it
absolutely. So,
if that if you're asking throughout my Mormon life, as I worked in a studio, we would go sometimes if somebody had a birthday, we might go down to the pub. And of course, I'm not drinking. And I never found it very comfortable. I never did break the word of wisdom all through my life. I kept it completely. But it did mean that you felt embarrassed. I would be embarrassed to have to say, no, I don't do that. Oh, why not? And then you have to talk about being a Mormon. And really, I didn't really want to talk about it. I tried to get away with one or two lines, like it was just a health code. And there were times later in life when I would say, it's just a health code. I don't even agree with it, but I keep it because I love the church. So it was just a means to
yeah,
an end. I didn't have any problem not having tea and coffee and spirits. I didn't ever get the taste of alcohol particularly, so I wasn't missing anything. And smoking has got to be
yeah,
so damn stupid. So I did find it embarrassing because in the end, it wasn't very long. In fact, it's one of my questions in a 14-page letter to my stake president a few years later is the word of
yeah.
wisdom. It's just stupid.
Uh,
Other than smoking,
okay,
I found out why it occurred, so that made it ridiculous. And
yeah,
as in the case of sexuality, that it isn't so much that it's wrong; it's about how much you indulge yourself. If you drink so much that you are a threat to your family, or you beat them up, or there's no income for the family because it's all wasted on drink, then you shouldn't be drinking that much. So it came down to moderation, and that was the key. I felt that it was fine if people, even if they were Mormon, to drink tea and coffee. Not that I could, as a bishop, sort of sanction it. I couldn't say, "Oh, well, that's fine. Don't worry about it." But my opinion was that the moderation was the most important thing, and I did not understand why the church had got so wound up on tea, coffee, and even
the
alcohol.
alcohol. Yes. Yeah, so let me
Yeah,
come in on that. It's some really interesting points, and you've mentioned your letter to your state president later. We'll explore that in a little. I'm really interested to know more about that, but we'll pick up on that in a few minutes. I think the reason I asked the question was exactly what you said: is to explore how the word of wisdom affects us culturally. I know around the world, for instance, if you're looking at the church in places like China or Japan, that if you refuse a cup of tea in those cultures, it is highly insulting, genuinely, to turn around. It's part of the social structure there, and the word of wisdom actually does a massive impact on missionary work in those cultures as a result. Now, I jest about tea in the UK, and it's not like that here, but certainly the offer of a cup of tea is and sharing a cup of tea with people is very cultural, and the word wisdom there has a big impact on the way that we are perceived in the UK as members of the church. That I think is a really important piece to explore. I want to come back to your experiences, though. Obviously, we're talking about the word of wisdom a little bit, but I want to come back to you as an early member of the church. You talked about being baptized. You talked about how you shared that with your family. And I noticed you said that your twin brother was baptized at the same time as you. Now, you've already described how you were discussing with your colleagues about the Book of Mormon, about church, about faith in general, and they gave you a copy of the Book of Mormon, and you went home and read that and looked into it. How did it go from there to you and your twin brother being baptized at the same time?
You mean what happened afterwards?
You and your brother were baptized. You said you were baptized on the same day. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. How how d- how did you tell your brother about this religion you were looking into, and how did he come to be part of this story as well?
We both we both shared the same religious ideas. We were affected at the same time. We both listened to and read this Plain Truth magazine and became religious together. So what I was doing, he was doing. So um, what happened was, apart from me just getting this information from a colleague at work, my mother happened to be out one day with a friend in a car. They were in Surrey, which must be about an hour away, down at the London Temple. They didn't know anything about Mormonism. They didn't know that I was interested or I had even got some leaflets and stuff. And they went in because of all the lovely flowers to see the temple site. No sooner had they got out the car and walking about, they got dragged into what was then the visitors centre, just a brick building there at the entrance. And somebody was telling them all about the church and giving them lots of leaflets. And my mother said, "Oh, my twins would be interested in this." And so she didn't need to bring home the Book of Mormon because she knew I had it, but she brought loads more pamphlets. So you've got two. So it's me praying and getting the answer from true sources, unbeknown to me, coming to me. So we both felt the same. He felt just the same as I did. And so the big difference is that we were doing the same things and living the same, attending the same branch. But as time went by, we felt we wanted to go on a mission, but we were supporting our mother financially at home. And so we tossed a coin. As I remember, I cannot be too sure, but I didn't say, "Oh, you go, I can't be bothered." We both wanted to go, but we couldn't go together. So we thought, well, let's do it one by one. One of us goes first, then the other one goes. That's how we reasoned it. Flipped a coin, David won, and he went and he got called to Scotland. While he's in Scotland, after a while, I meet Norma, who became my first wife. Of course, I didn't know, but I was involved in missionary work, and I was sort of like a district mission president. And I was going from branch to branch. I don't think there were any wards within the North Kent district of the British Mission, speaking his sacrament, you know. And there she was sitting down there, this beautiful girl, and we used to chat after sacrament, and then I'll go home. And this would happen over many months, until I got to the point where I fell in love with her and I took her out. I don't know if I'm going too fast, but the point is that it got to a point where my brother had been out for quite a while, maybe over a year, and I thought, well, should I go on a mission? I want to. I went to see the branch president, who was he was a man from America, a missionary couple, one of the older missionary couples that we see around. It was so weak on the ground that they didn't have anybody better to be branch president. And he was a lovely man, really nice. And I went to him and said, look, I don't know what to do. I want to go on a mission, but I'm in love with a girl. And this is where you get the difference. Years later, President Kimball says, every man on a mission. And even these days, it's like part of your responsibility as a male, if you're converted, to go on a mission. No two ways about it. But then it was different. And I followed what they told me to do. This branch president said to me, being in love and getting married and taking this young girl to the temple is far more important than going on a mission. You don't go. You go to the temple with this girl. So when my brother came home, we waited. We went to the temple, and I never went on a mission. So my brother was, you could say, my brother was on this mission, and I was getting on at home. I got married. He was left alone at home with my mother, quite lonely because I'd gone, struggling to know what to do for a living. And he, eventually met his wife, and his life was extremely successful on a financial level or materially way above mine. But that's almost irrelevant. The point is that he carried on being strong in the church much longer after me. After I was excommunicated,
Yeah.
he was still strong in the church, but he's not now.
Okay. What? Yeah, no, I understand that. Let's bring you back. There's so much of your story, Bob, that is fantastic to explore. I want to bring you back a little bit. So you've described traveling around the district. I was going to say the stake, but obviously it wasn't a stake then. And you met the most beautiful woman in the world, and she falls in love with you, and that then brings you to that decision of, do I serve a mission or do I get married? And the counsel that you received from your branch president was to marry. What I'm interested to know, to talk to me about your church life from here. What was it like being a member of the church? Maybe you can talk about some of the callings you held, some of the responsibilities you held, and talk to me about that journey through your church experience and life over the years.
Do you mean before I got married or afterwards?
Both, both. Take the story you talked about being married. Talk to me about what was that, being married and being a young married couple in the church, and the responsibilities you held, the callings you held. I know, for instance, you were called pretty quickly after that as a branch president or a bishop down in Kent. Talk to me about your church experience and how you and your wife navigated that through the years.
Okay. Uh, you know, one of the problems we notice when we realise what's going on is the sheer, I would say, stupidity of the hierarchy of the church dictating and telling young people, you need to get married as soon as possible. Get them to the temple, get on a mission, get in the temple, have children quickly. Then I believed all that, and I think I felt it was important. But when I think about it now and I look back, I think how stupid all that is. How important it is to take your time and for a woman to maybe get qualifications, get a career, and fine if she doesn't want to have a career, but at least get qualifications and have a sense of independence, so that if you decide, no, I don't want to get married or don't want children, that's fine too. That's great. But if I really want to have babies and have a family, well, that's great too. But this whole thing about you need to quickly get married. It does solve one problem, which is the frustration, the sexual frustration that is imposed on the youth with the paranoid sexual program that the church promotes. I mean, they don't mean to promote it, but it is paranoid. The whole inquiry and investigation and supervision of our sexual lives by Mormonism with one-to-one interviews and so forth. It's just shocking. It's completely abusive and unnecessary. And yet there is this sense that, well, we can't have sex. So, well, that's fine. We'll just have self-control. But of course, when two people that are young and in love carry on dating, the threshold of temptation just gets higher and higher and harder and harder. You become more familiar with time and the duration of the courtship to the point where it's very difficult not to rip each other's clothes off. And so Mormons generally would get married very quickly, because if you don't, you'd be fornicating. And of course, then
how quickly did you get
have a
married?
massive problem.
How quickly
You
did
probably
you?
never get to the temple because you're unworthy. So what I'm saying is, we had a fairly short courtship because we found it difficult. So got
Okay.
married pretty quick. Maybe in another world or a different place, I might have met somebody and might have had a sexual relationship for quite some time and decided, yeah, they are the right person, I'll move on, which is what people do out there. But for Mormons, it's slightly different, isn't it? Massively different, actually. So, but the good
How
thing
long did it
is,
take?
the upside is,
How long, Bob? Yeah. How long did you court for? From when you decided that you wanted to ask her out to the point you got married, how long did that last? How long was the courtship?
it's we thought it could be a year away, you see, because my brother, it must have been late when I fell in love and wanted to do this, because my brother was back in good time for the wedding. But I remember thinking, oh, we'll get back when David gets back, and that will be in such and such a time. And it was many, many months away. But we had to keep pulling the wedding forward because of our appetite. It's as crazy as that. David was there. He had finished an honourable
Yeah.
mission, and it was wonderful because he was my best
Yeah.
man. So even though
Yeah.
we pulled it forward, we must have pushed it forward long after he would get back. That's probably what happened. It's hard to remember. So yeah, we're pulling it forward. I would say, off the top of my head, I could be wrong. It could be 6 months. Could be 6 months or something like that.
So
I may be wrong.
a 6 month courtship.
It was a nightmare. To be honest,
No,
it was a nightmare.
and
It was an absolute nightmare of frustration. Um, that's Mormonism for you. Inspires me to think about it.
absolutely. So yeah. So you got married at 6 months, and I'm assuming for the American audience or outside of the UK audience, again, an idiosyncrasy of marriage law in the UK is that the marriage must always be performed in a location where anyone can attend, because anyone has to be able to object to any marriage taking place, and therefore it was never permitted legally in this country for a marriage to be directly in the temple. And to be married in the UK, you would always have a civil service, normally in your ward or in your branch, and then you would go to the temple. And the encouragement was, where possible, to attend the temple the same day. Is that what happened for yourself, Bob? Did you go off to get married and then go off to the temple to be sealed the same day?
Yeah, we did that.
Yeah.
We had a lovely wedding. It was freezing cold, 22nd of March, 1969, at the Medway Chapel, and I helped to build it. I just went down there and
Okay.
helped. Not
Yep.
because I was getting married, but it was just the things we did. Anyway, we got married in that chapel. It was freezing cold that day, And my wife, Norma, who is normally extremely, tragically almost shy, was just beaming all day. She was on all day. It was just a lovely atmosphere, lovely wedding. We had the reception. There was no church building anywhere, so we didn't go back to the church like cultural.
Yeah.
We went to the Fremantle Hall in Bexley, Kent. And my dad had arranged all this with the family. It was just a big hall. People had drinks. Relatives came who were not Mormon. We were the only Mormons in the room. So the majority were non-Mormon. And we did explain that during the reception period where we must have said something that we wouldn't stay all evening, but we would go off later towards evening to the temple to be sealed together. And that wasn't really a problem. It could have been in some families, but it wasn't. We were just glad to get away, to be honest, because I don't really like drinking and I'd rather be with her and go. So going to the
Yeah.
temple was obviously important to me. My family understood it.
Yeah.
It was not a problem. So yes, you're
Yeah.
correct. We knew that we had to be there and go through our endowments that day or wait a year. And again, another awful, awful policy of the church to make you go to the temple in case you should die during the first year and be cut off forever from your path. So you were forced to go. Of course, I'd already been. I've had my endowments, but she hadn't.
Yeah. So did she
It's
do
not
her
that I
endowments
resented it at
on
the
the
time.
same day? So did she do her
Oh,
endowments
oh,
actually on
oh!
the same day?
No,
So
I don't.
you got
I don't know.
married, went to the
No, I
temple.
don't. I can't. I cannot remember whether she had her endowments the same day or whether she'd gone through a month or two before. I simply can't remember.
Okay. Yeah, and again, just for any non-UK audience, any temple is designed to be a beautiful building. The church invests a lot of time and effort to make temples beautiful. But if you've never been to the London Temple, what you won't appreciate is what a beautiful place it is. It's not in London. It's in a little village called Newchapel, just about 20 miles south of London, in the middle of the countryside, in the middle of nowhere. It was built on the site of an old manor house, which the church bought, and it has acres and acres of ground surrounded by countryside. And it is a beautiful, beautiful location. The manor house is still there for many years until Preston was built. It was the MTC. My brother went to the MTC at London, and actually, purely from wedding day point of view, actually going to the temple, I suspect, was a really beautiful moment that day.
It, it was. If I was to be honest, I knew that we would be kneeling over an altar dressed in the robes of priesthood. And if I could have had my way, I would rather she had a wedding dress on and we just sat in a room and it sealed us rather than all this regalia, which is very flattering on a physical level. Um, we
And
just we just went through the procedure of that, and I complied with it. But there is this kind of reservation that although I fully believe what I was doing, I wish that it could have been different. Or this person that sealed us, I didn't know him. He didn't take long to do it. We were just probably in a queue of other people. So it's all a bit less personal. Of course, my family, I can't remember whether my family came down and waited outside. I I know this is a terrible problem in America and a shocking problem, a repulsive policy to prevent loved ones from going to the temple to witness that wedding. All my family had been at the wedding, the civil ceremony, so they were happy. And I can't remember anybody else being there. There may have been, but I can't remember. But they would, of course, waited outside. It would have been my
yeah,
brother and I and my wife. my older brother, my sister, my mother, nobody could have got in. Shocking, really.
Yeah.
It's the way it is.
Yeah. No, I understand. I understand. But obviously, you've joined the church. You've met this beautiful, beautiful bride, and you've been married, and you've been sealed in the temple. What happens next in Bob's story? Where does the story go? What happens in your life, particularly from a church context?
On 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 sort of physical level, we moved into a flat in Sydenham, which is southeast of London. It was a grotty, horrible place. I think sometimes we had the upstairs. And downstairs, there's an old lady who was the mother of the guy who owned the house. And the arrangement was we would cook her dinner every day because she was very fragile. For having a rented flat above at a reduced rate. And it was a dump. But you know, the thing is, and I don't know who would put up with it these days, I subsequently hear of couples who get married when they're ready. And they get married when they've got the house, the carpets down, all the furniture in place, got a car in the garage, the lights up, pristine and beautiful, and they move in. But it's the complete opposite in my life. A rented dump that I would have spat out and walked out. If somebody said, "You're going to live here on my own," I said, "You must be joking. I'd rather live in a tent." And you know, the difference is that I'm with this woman, this angel, and that is the difference. Everywhere, no matter how bad or how humble, becomes paradise because she's there. And that's what made it. Um, it made it wonderful. I can still remember the first few weeks of feeling the I can't explain it. I wouldn't call it homesickness. The movement, the shift from being at home in a nice little home with my mum, and then being in a grotty little flat with a woman I didn't really know, even though I adored her, and feeling that transition and that difficulty of settling in what was a dump, really. And she was the only compensation, but we had eyes ahead. We had a vision of having our own house, and we were saving. And we just carried on living and saving. And she was working, I was working, still going to church at Sydenham. I don't know if you want me to go this far, but I quickly became called into a calling at church. Sydenham had a rented, it was church, but it was just I think it was originally a scout hut, and I think the church bought it. I think that's how it was. It was a kind of, I call it a scout hut, brick built with 2 or 3 rooms at the back, very small kitchen and a toilet and a couple of other rooms. And I think the church here, so it was a sort of chapel, but it was a bit of a dump. But I was very quickly called to be councillor in the branch presidency. So I'm still in this grotty little flat and I'm going to work. I was going to work in London, but the people I work for moved to Sutton in Surrey. And the train was just up the road. I could go either into London or down to Sutton. So it worked out perfectly. I carried on working. She was working in London as a shorthand typist to a financial firm. She was very good at what she did. And we were hoping to save and put a deposit on a house. Church was wonderful. We loved our life, apart from the grotty little flat. Life was all right. It was fine.
Okay. So I'm just picturing this: South London, sometimes I don't know. When you look back, I think back about my early experiences. Sometimes those grottiest flats give the best memories, in terms of the experiences we have in our lives. We recognise those for what they were, but sometimes those memories are very special. But I'm hearing about you serving in that branch. Talk to me about your church career from here, if you like. Let's bring the story forward. So obviously you've joined the church, and I know that you're going to go on to be a bishop and a branch president. I'm really interested to explore that church career, if you like. What the experiences of your career, how you go from being a young married through how your church journey takes you over the years.
Yeah. Well, I was had this calling, and that was fine. I seem to remember it may not have come immediately. I had other callings first. I was possibly in young men's again. I certainly taught at, at the Sydenham. Uh, would it be a ward? No, it's a branch. It's a branch. And I taught from lesson manuals. When I say lesson manuals, I don't remember a proper lesson manual. We had things like Marvelous Work and a Wonder, Jesus the Christ, the book. Um, there were priesthood manuals. I may have had a Sunday school manual that I can't think of what it was. But whatever the curriculum was that I was given, I would teach. And I started to teach gospel doctrine class. I may have taught other classes, but I think it was mainly that class. So that went on for a year or two. Um, it wasn't long before I was person. So function uh, in that calling, okay. Everything was going fine. I forgot what my wife was doing. I think she probably was in primary. She didn't really like Relief Society. I think her shyness and might be in she felt quite at home with kids, but she might have struggled with certain types of female sisters. Sisters are female, of course. She would have struggled with certain personalities that were strong and find it difficult to relate to them. She always had that problem, but she would be happy in primary and also as a secretary because she was an excellent secretary. So she was more in the background in call-ins than she was up front leading. But she was or became the most incredible mother any child could ever have. She was simply out of this world, in my opinion. And of course, I'm biased. So everything was going fine, and then one day there is this decision that the branch was going to become a ward, and of course that meant there's going to be a bishop. And so the day came when we were asked to attend, and I was asked to go to London to. It was either I think it was Wandsworth Chapel in London, where a visiting. I'm just trying to get this right. It wasn't a visiting authority. We're talking about the stake president deciding on who should be bishop. But there was a bit. Now I remember there was a visiting authority. I'm just trying to think of his name. It's got out of my head. I have to say it was a guy that I never really liked. Subsequent years, I've heard a patriarch even derogatory about this particular general authority. Can't remember his name. But anyway, I go off with the rest of them to Wandsworth Chapel, and I'm taken by a president of the stake, I won't tell you his name, to meet at the front of the chapel. And I don't even know now whether it was Wandsworth. It could have been Hyde Park. But I was introduced to a general authority who wanted to interview me. And I am gobsmacked. I'm thinking, what am I doing? What's going on? And he sits me down, not in a private room, but in front of the hubbub in front of him. There was just stuff going on. People were assembling to meet, and so people were talking and chatting, and I'm sitting on the stand with the general authority, and he calls me to be the new bishop of Dartford ward, and that meant I was going to be ordained a high priest. And of course, I said yes, but I was just astonished and bewildered. But that's the way it goes. So I became the bishop of Dartford ward for the next 3 years. So where would you
How
like to
old
go
were you?
now?
How old were you when you were called as bishop?
Well, I think I was 23. And although my book says I'm the
23.
youngest, I think it was just a guess. If I'd had heard that somebody else was that
Yeah.
young, because everybody would say to me, "You weren't that young, were you?" So I'd say, "Yeah, yeah." And I got the impression that I must have been the youngest bishop. So I put it on the book. Now, whether I was is irrelevant, quite
Yeah.
irrelevant. So
Absolutely. I certainly know of
I was,
other bishops and branch presidents who served at a young age like that back in that kind of era, in the late 60s, early 70s, and those kind of things. But it's a really fascinating thing, though. But 23, you're a bishop of a new ward in Kent, and you can have members in that ward that are older than you, have life experiences that you've yet to imagine, but they're coming to you for counsel and advice and pastoral leadership. How did you find that? 23 years old, with all with other people coming you for everything. How was that for you?
it depended on who was coming to see me and what their problem was. I remember the first time I sat down with somebody, I simply hadn't got a clue what to say to him. And I must have just mumbled my way through it. It seemed to work all right. I settled down and I took it very seriously. I prayed like hell. I'd already studied a lot. I mean, you haven't even asked me, but it would go backwards to come to this point.
That's
I
fine. Yeah.
prayed like I prayed like nobody else would pray. I went to the woods to pray. I had an appointment with God regularly to pray in the woods, no matter what the weather, apart from praying at home and at church. So I had this very ardent, serious approach. This was no social function for me. I was serious about trying to do what God wanted. And I thought I just did the best I could. I had no idea whether what I said to people helped them. I didn't get any big repercussions, and people people kept saying that they loved me for being the bishop. I just did the best I
Uh,
could.
uh,
Uh,
I think most members, on the whole, do love their bishops, unless the bishops do something really, really stupid. And certainly, I can imagine that you were loved, Bob.
I didn't really have a problem until I started to doubt and have certain questions that got worse and worse. That was toward the third year. I think I started off the first year, maybe the second, um, giving all the stock answers that I thought the church taught, and I believed what the church taught. So I taught what the church, you know, told me. So the understanding I had about the gospel, policies, what should be said, how serious things should be taken, whether there should be discipline. I just did it all feeling happy to be able to serve in that calling. But
Yeah,
I did reach a point where I had so many doubts about the authenticity of the church that I asked to be released because I felt
but
compromised.
so you first had concerns about the church and perhaps the truth claims we talk about the church right back then in the 70s while you were serving as a bishop? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I know we've talked about this offline before. You said that you wrote a letter to your stake president where you have 14 points that you raised with him. What were those? What were your concerns back in that time before the internet even was a figment of anyone's imagination? What were those concerns? What did you write to your stake president about?
Okay. This is how it started. On my route to London on the trains when I used to go, and I was before I was even bishop. This would be maybe a year after I got baptized. I would be reading the Book of Mormon on the train. Or I could be reading a church book. The trains were packed in those days. People were standing looking down at you. And there must have been some Pentecostal, born again Christians on the train. And somewhere on the way to London, they would get on. And as they stood over you, they would look down and see I'm reading the Book of Mormon. And I had somebody say to me one day, um, you, they would say, I can see, excuse me, I can see you're reading what looks like the Book of Mormon. Oh, I said, yes, that's right. I'm in a conversation. And it's almost as if nobody's in the train because you start to talk as if nobody's there because you get heated. Or at least you don't start by getting heated, but you begin to explain why you believe. And then as I was talking to people about why I loved it, why I believed it, they would start criticizing the religion. So here we are having an argument about religion on the train. Now this happened. I would meet these people almost not by arrangement, but they happened to get on the train. Now and again they'd get on my carriage. And this discussion seemed to be going on for a long time, on and off on a train. One day, one of these passengers slipped me a leaflet about Joseph Smith, and it was derogatory. Don't ask me what it said. It probably said something about treasure digging and that he was not a reliable character and could never have wrote the Book of Mormon. Now, I'd never ever had anybody say anything derogatory, critical about my faith. I was already getting my scriptures marked up in red. I devoured books. I've read Marvelous Work and Wonder, Jesus the Christ, Articles of Faith, and so forth. I was reading Essentials in Church History, Mormon Doctrine, and so on. So I was getting very, very conversant with scripture and LDS books in general. I didn't know everything, but I was really, really serious about it. And so this was the first time somebody had said to me, here's a leaflet. Now, it's an official leaflet. I didn't take much notice of it. I think I just threw it away in disgust. You know. But on the Jurassic Park films where you have a family say, I don't know if they did it, but I remember this scene where they're all having a little nice time in there, as I was in the church, having drinks around the table and laughing. And that's me at church, enjoying my membership. And suddenly there is this disturbance. The water or the wine or beer in the glass starts to shimmer with the vibration of the dinosaur that's coming towards them. Well, I would say for years from then on, even past being released as a bishop, because I kept pushing the doubts under the carpet. So even being released as a bishop didn't solve any problem. It just meant I was relieved from having to do that job, feeling like that. So I kept feeling the disturbance of a simple leaflet that I'd read. It just was this disturbance, this sense of shaking. And it's pretty bad. It might be trivial in
Yeah.
itself, but it set up this something on the Richter scale had moved, and I never quite got rid of it until I had solved the problem later in life. So here, you can see the letter, typed letter, 14 pages
Just a short
of
letter then. Just a
things that
short
were
letter then.
bothering me. Now, this is when I was a bishop. This is when I was a bishop.
Yeah.
I started off with a sort of preface to the stake president, and then it goes on to describe one by one all the various things. Looks like I'm talking for a long time before I get to the first point, number one, and there was quite a few. I don't know if you want me to talk about these.
Yeah,
They
just
are
briefly.
they are they
Tell
are
me what your
things that
concerns were.
disturb me then.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Tell me what your
They
points
are
were.
things which okay. It might be easier to refer to a piece of paper here because
Yeah.
I wrote the out thing. Uh, just bear with me a minute.
That's fine.
Number one was contraception.
Okay.
We started having kids, and I read about stuff,
Yeah.
read about church policy because I was a bishop as well on contraception and the technicalities. I didn't have a problem with it myself. I didn't have a problem with it. I did
Yep.
when I had 6 kids, but I didn't at that stage. But I did have a problem with the policy of the church. The next one was civil obedience. We talk sometimes in classes about, well, what would you do if you're in Germany and you're a member of the church and you had to join the Nazi party? Would you go to war? Would you do anything the church tells you to do or your country tells you to do just because Mormonism says you should? So I didn't like that. I just felt it was wrong. I think I missed one out. Before the word of wisdom, as I told you, was another one that I had problems with. I keep turning the page. That goes on for a few pages. Um, Number 5, celestial marriage. Again, this refers to the Bible and what Jesus said about being married in heaven. Elder Peterson said in his leaflet about that. He had a little leaflet then that
Yeah.
everybody had about being sealed and married in heaven. And he interpreted the words of Jesus to be the exact opposite of what Jesus said. I didn't like it. I didn't agree with it. I've been talking nonsense. So I wrote about it and put it down. A personal revelation. I had been so in the spirit of things in the church that I was wrought upon at times, not very often, with a very powerful sense of promising people things that never came to pass. And I thought I was under the Spirit. This is about revelation. This is about having powerful feelings. And I wrote about this. So one of my points of disagreement was personal revelation. And the other aspect of that is so obvious as you pass through church life, which is the fact that I've been so exposed to church meetings, often in bishoprics, even when I wasn't a bishop, as an executive secretary or councillor, as a state clerk, and as a state clerk for 1 or 2 years, constantly in the meetings. I never saw revelation anywhere. I never saw the significance or the phenomena of revelation. It was people just struggling to make up their minds, feeling they're doing the right thing and making a decision. Nothing ever came through. So I had a problem with that. Also, in the church, we're taught the blood atonement problem is that murderers have no forgiveness, that they should atone for their own blood. Now, I thought about that in the civic sense of common law in the country, where do you or do you not believe in capital punishment? I believe the church was in agreement with it. And I was, actually. But then I began to realize that they were saying more than that. They were saying a murderer cannot be forgiven by the atonement. The Bible says they were. I could bring up verse after verse that infer and almost tell you that the murderers of Christ were forgiven. And that's God, a human person. So I got that at another point there. Number 8, the murderer. Number 9, tithing. I began to realize very quickly that tithing was erroneously administered and misinterpreted. And that's a pretty strong one, which obviously has come to light in recent years. So tithing was a big problem. I still pay tithing, by the way. I never stopped paying it until I was about 60 or something. Another one was, I'm not sure if I finished them all, to do with faith, grace, and works. There is, in the church, always has been, and most members wouldn't even think about it, but having been a very ardent Bible reader, and I've read tons of Christian books who are not authored by the church. After reading all the church books, I've read loads of Christian authored books, Catholic and Protestant and other denominations. They've really been stunning and amazing to me and been a lifeline. C.S. Lewis was one of them. All of C.S. Lewis's books, and I've studied them, like problems of pain and a grief observed and the miracle and so on. I learned to think outside the box a little bit and to question things by reading people like C.S. Lewis. And one of the problems I came across very quickly was that there's not much grace talked about. It's mentioned in the Book of Mormon, and it's mentioned once, I think, in Doctrine and Covenants, but you don't find general authorities and curriculum manuals talking much about faith and grace. They just keep talking about works, And so I've got a problem with that. I've always had a problem with it. And it's something that I wrote. So yeah, these 14 pages were given to the stake president. I don't know if you want me to tell you what happened about that or not.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to know what the stake president's response was, actually. That would be really interesting to know.
Okay, well, it brings up one of the things that I was going to say. There were two things that happened, two examples, really. One is that the stake president was really worried about me, without mentioning his name, although I would never say anything derogatory about him, but he was a lovely man. So, but I still won't say his name. He was very kind to me when I was stake clerk later, because he called me to be stake clerk once I was released as bishop, just to look after me. And I think he thought that by being in the stake presidency, I would be influenced by them to stay strong in the church, even if I was released.
Yeah.
And I remember he called me a stake clerk. I was sitting with him on my own, and we went through some stuff that he wanted me to do. He had a very high-powered job outside. I won't tell you what it is, or you might guess. But he had a very, very powerful, well-paid job in industry. And he sat at the table and tried to explain some finances, what he wanted me to do. Now, I was useless at school. Maths was shocking. Couldn't read, And I sat there feeling dumb. And yet I had to say to him, President, I don't know what you're talking about. Can you? And I felt so embarrassed. Can you tell me again what you mean? And I felt so small. Uh, Normally, if somebody, or quite often in life, when somebody's explained something that you don't understand it, you say, "Oh, yeah, fine, fine," and you try to change the subject. So I had to say, don't get what you mean. And instead of going, "Oh, for God's sake," or correct, he just had this manner which was so gorgeous, so loving and caring. Didn't put me under his arms around me, but he would say, Bob,
Yep.
let me try and explain it like this. Come over here, sit next to me. Let me go through it again. He didn't make you feel embarrassed or awkward. So,
Yep.
it was a hard thing to say, I don't want to be bishop and I've got a problem. But I had a problem. I gave him this letter. So when he was ready, he said to me, Bob, I've got a lot on at the moment. So what I've done, I've delegated this to one of my counsellors. So I think really, if he'd have dealt with it himself, we might have got somewhere. But to be honest, I
Yep.
don't think anybody knows these days any more than they did then. I.e., when people have problems and questions about church authenticity, they're very unlikely to get a satisfactory from any bishop and any stake president and any councillor because A, they don't know, or B, they don't want to know. Because if they did, they'd be
Yep.
asking the same questions. So I was shoved over, and that was okay. I wasn't offended. I thought, okay. And it was given to his first counsellor. So the day came for the first counsellor to sit down with me to go through this, I assume, just to go. It may not have covered it all. Maybe we were going to meet 2 or 3
Yep.
times. He was in his court. Ball was in his court, you see. I sat down with him in
Yep.
a private room, and he sat across the table from me. And it's all a bit vague. I don't know how long I was in that room. I could have been half an hour, but it felt like 3 minutes because he kept staring at me. He just stared and smiled. And I sat there thinking, what's he smiling for? And I said to him, actually, is there a problem, President? You keep grinning. He said, come on, Bob. And I'm saying, sorry, what was that, President? Uh, Come on, why are you doing this? Why why have you what's the reason you've got all these questions? As if to say you're trying to con us. You're looking for an excuse. You can't be real, you can't be serious. This is really not very important. What's your game? What are you playing at? Just I should have said something derogatory. I should have said something insulting and walked out the room. But I wasn't like that then. I was just nice and courteous. I said, "Oh, so well, I feel very strongly about these things. They mean a lot to me, and I'm genuinely looking for answers." And I don't remember anything else. I honestly cannot remember what the hell he said after that because all I see in my head is this. I feel bad about it now. I don't feel bad as in pity or sorry for him. I feel angry that he dispensed with me. He made a judgment about where I was coming from, what my motives were, when he had not the slightest idea. Okay, he knew my wife. They were from the same
Yep.
branch. He at least I think he was. He knew my wife. He knew what she was like. So he was familiar with her and me getting married, and he knew some fundamental things about me, but he didn't know my soul. He didn't know my life. And here he was making a judgment about where I was coming from with all these questions that have been going through my mind.
Yep.
Probably for some time, quite some time.
Yep.
Really, ever since I've been baptized. So that was that. The other thing was.
Do you think he ever took your question seriously?
Sorry? I never got any answers.
Do you think he took your question? Yeah.
He didn't answer any questions. He didn't address the question.
Yep.
He simply dismissed me as kind of fraudulent. Like I think what he thought was, this guy wants out. He wants to find a justifiable reason in his head to get out of the church, live his life, go and sin, do what he likes, drink coffee. He's not serious. So he's not to be taken seriously. That's why he grinned at me. I find it, when I think about it now, I find it highly offensive that anybody should treat somebody else like that. I wouldn't do it.
Yep.
And then, if I may say so, there was another very quick story. Traveling with the other counsellor in that stake presidency, he must have picked me up. I must have been en route somewhere that day. There was an arrangement where he picked me up. Don't ask me how. But we're going to a meeting together and he's driving. And I'm having serious doubts. It's probably before this. And I suddenly think I'm going to just say something to him, see what he says. So I pluck up the carriage while he's driving. We're all talking about something and nothing. And I suddenly say, President, I think I'm losing my testimony. And do you know what his reply was?
Go on.
What have you been doing as he's driving? What have you been doing wrong? What have you done? What sin have you committed lately? And that was his answer. I said, done nothing. I was a temple recommend holder, I was keeping all the regulations, keeping all the laws, fully worthy. Never had eyes for another woman. There was nothing in my life. I was ardently faithful and obedient to church teachings, while I'm having doubts. So you have this association.
So your experience
with any time somebody starts to doubt or question, it's because somehow they've done something wrong or neglected maybe the gospel or haven't prayed enough, or did they pay all their tithing, or did you watch something you shouldn't have watched? There's always some reason that's derogatory, that's sinful, that's weak, that's demoralizing, that causes somebody to doubt the church. And to this day, it still goes on. Prophets still, lazy learners.
Let me ask you a question, Bob.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, okay? You've had this experience. You've got 14 pages worth of doubts that you've shared with your stake presidency. The stake presidency doesn't respond directly. His counsellor is dismissive of your questions. And when you raise this with his other counsellor, he accuses you of having something amiss in your life that would be taking you away. Why at that point did you not walk away from the church? This was in the 70s, early mid-70s. How come it took you through to 2005 to leave the church? Why didn't you walk away then?
Well, it's a simple reason. Fundamentally, I was losing my testimony sufficiently to feel I could not carry on as a bishop. Now, if you said, "Oh, well, if you weren't a bishop, would you carry on going to church?" Well, of course, I'd just carry on going, because when I say of course, there was so much I loved. I had these problems here, but that wasn't the end of the earth. It wasn't. It was enough to make me feel like I shouldn't be in this calling because I'm increasingly finding it difficult to give people guidance when I myself am starting to doubt. But I haven't lost my faith in the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith, in the leadership of the church. I just believed in absolutely. I mean, I believed in Joseph Smith uh, almost at the point of excommunication. I still had a bit of a feeling about him that maybe, it was the last thing to go, this feeling about Joseph Smith. So it wasn't a time to run away or just to dump it. But the other aspect of this, and very important, is this. I came in, I ended up the poor schooling. I was poorly schooled. I felt my opinions weren't very important. They didn't matter compared to others. Now, I may have had strong feelings about the church and could defend it, but if I was talking to a brother in the church or to a leader, and they said, Bob, I think your problem is this, so I think you ought to try harder. You ought to reread the Quran. Maybe that would help you, or would you take the challenge of reading this or praying? Or I'd say, yeah, okay. So I'll carry on working. I'll carry on trying because I didn't have the confidence that just because I had some doubts, I was right. I'm still looking.
Yep.
If somebody got the answers, I would have thought, oh, that's good. Oh, you got an answer. But nobody had the answers. So I'm still struggling on believing that I should still do the things they tell me because then I would find the answers. So I'm still going on and
Yep.
on. And all through my life, of course, you've got to understand that when I get married and I'm a bishop, I'm busy. And I'm so busy, I'm
Yep.
not thinking about doubts. I'm thinking about helping people,
Yep.
serving people, having meetings, have nothing to do with doubts, none of that. So I'm okay. But then I move, when I do finally move along in life, I move into a house that we bought and I eventually go to Yorkshire and buy a small holding. And then you've got a massive thing. I've got a small holding, 4 acres, and a house to renovate. And then I get a call in very quickly at church. So I've got a mass of work on my hands. I'm distracted like hell. I've got so much to do, so many things I am loving that I'm doing. Cultivating land, planting an
Yep.
orchard, building a barn of sorts, um, being with a lovely woman, having more children, having my calling, teaching. I ain't got time to entertain too much stuff that could come in. It's like this Jurassic Park thing with this foot on the ground of the dinosaur from a distance. Now and again, I'd feel the
The
disturbance,
tremor.
and
Yep.
I'd go off on a tangent and read something, and I'd think, oh, I don't know. So the temple,
Okay.
one of them going to the temple, the endowment. So things were pushed aside, swept under the carpet because actually I was loving my life. I liked being a Mormon. I liked the consolation. I liked the fellowship, the communion with people. I liked mostly I liked my callings. I was in love with my wife. She was out of this world. I had a lovely family. What is there to stop? You see? I didn't want to stop. I didn't
Okay.
want to be wrong. I wanted it all to be true.
Um, Obviously, we've talked about this story in the 70s, and you've talked about moving to Yorkshire, and a lot of the time period it's covering is coming through the late 70s, through the 80s, and into the early 90s, and so. The church will often tell us that the doctrines don't change. The church is perfect. The doctrines of the church are perfect. So I just want to chuck a couple of things at you, and I'm interested to know, as you lived through these, what your perspective on them was. 1978, the ban on black members of the church being able to hold the priesthood. How did that sit with you? How did you feel about that at the time when that was announced and that came through?
Yeah, with a bit of shock and cynicism. That by that time I would have had some cynicism because uh, I believed that the significance of allowing the blacks to hold the priesthood was something old in church doctrine would happen one day. So I thought, well, the time has come, like everybody else. But then somebody would say, well, hang on a minute, wasn't there some pressure from the government, and wasn't the black problem? Forgot what it was, but there were reasons why the church would and should have done something about it by then, or they would be increasingly looked down on and in trouble with society and the way it was going. So there was that cynicism there all the time. But I need to say, the reason why I could hold on and keep going was partly because all these prayers that I was having in the woods, and I got to stopping that in that fashion, because I used to polythene bags down on the ground and I pray in a wood. And I've prayed in storms and lightning. I prayed in the snow, always in the dark, never in the light. It's always evening. And I would take my life to God every so often, maybe once a month or every other month. And I was doing this all my life. One day I was out in the car and I stopped doing it on my knees in a wood. I'd sit in my car and I'd go to a remote place. And it might be quite close to home because I lived in between two villages anyway. For instance, I could park my car near the sewage farm down the road from my small holding, and I could park it when nobody walked and it's dark. And across the field, my field, I could see my house and the lights twinkling in the dark. And so I would start to pray about my house, my wife, my kids, and I'd have a shopping list. And the shopping list is like all Latter-day Saints, perhaps even a general authority who comes to dedicate some blasted temple. They have a shopping list in their head, or if not on paper, and go through a procedure of, oh Lord, bless this place. I had my shopping list, the family, finances, finding peace, doing things correctly, and blessing my mum and my family, whoever was alive at the time. And then I'd finish my shopping list, and I was having already prayed and said, thank you, Father, for everything. And I'd asked everything, and I'd close in the name of Jesus Christ. And I'd go to start the ignition. But as I'm putting my hand on the ignition, having sat there for maybe a minute, I got this feeling inside that I didn't want to go home. I so much was enjoying this moment, feeling of being connected, that I just wanted to stay. Well, I'd already finished with the shopping list. That was thrown out the window, so to speak. So I took my hand off the ignition and sat back in the dark, in silence, and just meditated a bit. And you know what happened? I found these praises coming out of my mouth. I found my mind and my heart wanting to just thank God for everything. And it become very deep, very involved, and very spiritual, very powerful. So this whole thing about God was getting stronger and stronger as the years went by. And there was a divergence. You got most people who are strong in the church, and I don't mean to disrespect people, but I found by experience and observation that people were tied up with God through the church, their calling, the temple, the endowment, genealogy, teaching, being at church, socializing. The whole aspect of the church was God. And they found their connection with God through this church. Well, I was increasingly feeling it outside the church, me and God alone. Church was becoming more and more irrelevant. So when you talk about how did I feel, as time progressed, this divergence was occurring, and I was keeping the baby and looking at the bathwater. I don't think everything about the church is bad. Can be quite supportive for people that are in need of religion or just Christian, basic Christian doctrine, teachings, or companionship at church, fellowship, so on, some meaning in life. But for me, I was finding it more and more irrelevant. So even this priesthood thing would be one of those things that was related to the church, but not to me. So what happened is through my life, and I became a vice president later in life in York, not York, Selby branch president, which is about 8 miles south of York. I rarely got up and said, I know the church is true. I never got up and said, I know Joseph Smith was a prophet. I know the Book of Mormon. I know this. I never said that. I'll get up and say, so lovely to be here. Brothers and sisters, I do so love God and love you. And I love the teachings that he gave us through Joseph Smith, if you want, the Book of Mormon. I don't care where it comes from. Could be in the Lord of the Rings for all I care. If somebody's got something that helps me, I thought of all the books that I've read that come from other churches and people and how wonderful they were. So
Okay.
I'm able to carry on doing stuff in the church mechanically. I even had callings that were mechanical. I got to the point in my callings at church where I had been released as vice president because I couldn't carry on any longer for the same reason I couldn't carry on as a bishop, only it was getting worse. And so I got to the point where I was a councillor still in the branch presidency, and I loved the branch president. And he called me in the end as executive secretary. And I got in that call. I tried to do the thing the right way. But as time went by, I was so fed up with the church, so despondent, and even to the point where my wife had more or less died of cancer. And I've still got this calling at church. And I took it aside one day. I said to the vice president, look, President, what the hell am I in this calling for? I don't make any appointments for you. I don't do any written work. I do nothing. I do absolutely nothing but come to the meetings and sit there. What am I doing? What's the point of me being here? He says, I like you in the meetings. He's, he said,
I
I
think I
like
think to be fair,
your
that's a good reason to be at the meetings. You know.
He said, I like your alternative approach. I like to have somebody who has a different opinion to my counsel. So he's using me as a
Yeah. Do,
third counsellor. I didn't know that,
yeah.
but
Do
it
you
got
know
to the
what?
point, of course,
Do
where
you
I
know what, Bob? Okay.
what
All right. I know members. I know members from Selby, and I know members from Selby who were members when you were the branch president, and they talk very fondly of you as a branch president, as a man who clearly loved God, and how that came through, and be reassured that love of God was felt by the people that you served in that branch at that time. And it's a really powerful thought there. What is interesting there? So we've talked about that early experience in the church. You've talked briefly about that time, and you've moved to Yorkshire. You've got your small holding. You've served hard in the branch there. What changed for you in your life at this point that gradually brought you away from? We talked about how you came in the church and how you've had this nuance and how you've had your own belief as you've navigated that gospel journey. How does that now look as you start to transition and decide that maybe the church isn't for you anymore?
it, I wonder why I stayed so long. I think if I had been in a bad marriage or had difficulty in my relationship with my wife, do you know what's interesting? And I don't know why this is, but we didn't argue very often, maybe one day in a year, and it's usually over something insignificant, nothing important, but well, important enough to argue about, forget about it the next day. I would always feel angry about the church when we've had an argument, and I don't know why. And I
Yeah.
have a feeling that if I'd had had a bad life, You've got to remember that I feel like I've had a marriage and a family life with my children that was out of this world. And I had a small holding. I had animals and land, and I was just enjoying myself. It was just lovely. So I remember standing by the barn on the land, and I remember thinking, I don't really know about the church anymore, but at least I got a small holding. And I'm looking around thinking, at least I got a lovely wife. I've got nice kids, and I've got. So it's almost like, well, why worry about it? Just carry on, you know. So in a way, I think if life had been different, I would have been more agitated and maybe had made a decision to come out quicker. As it was, I didn't really want to rock the boat. I was just playing along, just going along with it. If somebody had took me aside and said, "Do you believe the church is true?" I wouldn't have lied. I wouldn't have said, "Oh yeah, fine, fine, don't worry about me." I would have said, "No, I think I don't believe it." I would have just told the truth. But of course, nobody asks you that. They think you're strong. They think you're wonderful. And so nobody ever gets to ask you what you really, really feel. Not really. And if you ask, if I was to, the times when I express myself openly, privately to a stake president, a councillor, or a bishop, um, they would always push it back as your problem of pride. Because you are saying things that are contrary to church teaching, that means you know better than the prophet. You think you know better than the prophet, otherwise you wouldn't say that. So if you have a divergence of view or opinion that's strong enough to complain about it or to have an issue with it, it means you must have pride because you've you think you know better than the prophet. And so of course they send me home to read the Book of Mormon again or read one. But in the end, when I began to get this power inside of God, if you like, this sense that I had been with God. Now, it might not show on the face or people wouldn't feel it necessarily, but I felt inside that I knew something about God, and it was a bit more like the Christ I remember reading about when I was young, the New Testament Christ, that loving, incredible figure that would forgive the prostitute and be nailed to a cross to forgive to allow our sins to be forgiven. That was the God in me, you see. So when somebody would have an issue about, I remember having an issue with somebody came to my house once, one of the leading brethren in the unit. And do you know what he did? He came in. I don't know whether he was coming anyway for some reason. He came into our hall and he said to me and my wife, "You realise, don't you, Bob and Norma, if you carry on like this, Bob, and you leave the church, you and your wife will be separated forever." And she just broke down and cried in front of me in my hall, in my house, because of the insensitivity of bloody member. And I sort of think about it, and I can think about people having arguments, sort of not arguments, but difference of opinion, strong difference of opinion in the corridor of the chapel, where they might bring some argument forward about the prophet or God or something. And inside, my face is smiling when I'm having the argument because I've got this resilience inside because God's inside. God is in control. God has given me what I lacked when I was young, the self-confidence, the feeling that I didn't know anything. I was beginning to overcome self-esteem problems and feel that God was behind me. I had him inside me, and that what they were saying didn't make sense, and I can just dispose of it, just don't care about it. So in the end, it got so that I was a problem to the church because I was saying, "No, I don't agree with you," because I had the confidence to say it. But it's taken me all my life to get that confidence. Not sure if I've answered the
Okay.
question, actually.
No, so you're talking about how, and I'm assuming we're talking early 2000s by now, time, if we will look at a timeline, that your
Yeah,
that your perspective on the gospel has always been nuanced. You've always had concerns, but it's changed, and maybe that you're now attending church for your family, for your wife, for the sense of community and how that's been with you at your life, but maybe not because of a firm commitment and testimony of the gospel as it is taught. Okay, but you're still active and you're still attending church. What changed?
what changed? Um,
The,
I think up to the point where my wife got ill, I I was just carrying along with all these doubts, but I was also starting to privately go online and begin to see things. An online site called the Mormon Curtain. It's a bit like Mormon Think, only
yeah,
had a bucket load of stuff on it. I don't know whether it still goes. I've never been back to it, but it was almost equivalent to any of the ex-Mormon sites where you begin to realize you're not the only one that's got a problem, that there are others like you. So you don't feel so bad. So I'm starting to absorb this and realize I'm going to church and I don't really like being there. I don't really want to be there. They're saying stuff that seems daft. And so this is going on, but I was going to church, but I wasn't going to church. So what happened is we'll get up on Sunday morning, or maybe Saturday. I'd say to my wife, I probably leave after sacrament. And the reason I go to sacrament is just to sit with her because I love her, because I don't want to go. I don't. I want to be with her, and she would, I think, like me. You've got to understand that she found it hard for me to be in this place years before. Not many years, but some years before, she would say to me, "Robbie, tell me why you feel different, why you feel you've got doubts." And I would sit with her on my own and I'd start to say things. And I start to be negative on purpose. I start to say the things I didn't like or didn't agree with. It wasn't long before she was teary eyed and crying. And I said, "Well, this is why I don't want to talk to you about it because it upsets you." And that's what happens. So you don't talk about it. So this is why I don't. And if you don't mind me carrying on, I'll carry on. But I didn't want to because she was so upset. So she didn't even know. I mean, I didn't even know why the church wasn't true. All I knew is I had questions, and up to the point of looking at online, where I began to see some much bigger issues coming forward. I didn't know. I didn't have an argument. I just had these ideas in my head that I didn't agree with. Oh, there's tons of little things I didn't agree with that go beyond this. I can't think what they all were. I just didn't like the church. I remember reading the book long before this, um, the Doctrine and Covenants commentary. Silly little book. It's a Doctrine and Covenants, but in between each section you've got commentary. I remember reading this book right the way through, all the sections as well, and thinking, I don't like the tone of this man who wrote this. I can't remember because I've got rid of the book, so I don't know who wrote it. It's a horrible attitude this man's got. It's repulsive. He sounds arrogant. He sounds like he hates ex-Mormons or anti-Mormon people. And I was beginning to see through the sieve. I was beginning to see holes everywhere in Mormonism by the attitude. I remember reading a lecture by Spencer W. Kimball that he gave at University of BYU, I think, about two people who had committed fornication that came to sit. And the whole lecture, his talk that day, and it was in pamphlet form, can't remember what it's called, was what he thought about this couple and how he dealt with them. And my God, I read that I read it all, and I thought, you bastard. And I wrote an article, which I've still got, and it's pages and pages and pages long, about Kimball and the way he addressed that couple and the way he thought about them and dealt with them in public. Of course, you didn't have their names, so that was fine. But his attitude was shocking beyond belief. I could not believe what I was reading. Now, if I'd have read that some years before, it would have just washed over me. Oh, yeah, okay, fine, yeah. But I was incensed, and I still am today. And it's in my book somewhere. I think I've put it in somewhere. I can't remember. I think I have. But you see, I'm having all these things that are going on, but I'm still going to church with my wife because she goes to church, and I love her. She said to me one day, she got hold of me we had quite a big hallway in Selby. We moved from the small building into a house in town, much better. And she got hold of me by the shoulders, and she said, "Robbie, I don't mind if you don't believe, but I always will. But you can do what you want." And she's holding me. She said, "I will always love you. So it's okay. It's okay." And I thought, my God, thank goodness for a sensible woman, for a flexible woman. I would have done the same to her. So suddenly I'm going to church because I want to be with her. She deserves it. And then she dies. Well, that's another story, but she dies. And I go there to be with one of my daughters, who still happens to live in Selby. All my kids are married by now. They're all gone. I'm on my own. I can do what I like. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to go to church at all. But I keep going because my daughter's there, just to keep her company for sacrament. Then I might go. So for a period of time, I was truanting. I was going off just for a walk or go home or do anything. Just get out of church, for God's sake. So yeah, it was a. But of course, then I got to the point where I had this involvement with a woman that was not a member, and she was married, but as I understood it, and as she confessed it, very unhappy in her marriage. And I took that to mean that one day she might think, "Oh, I'm going to leave," but she didn't. So I was beginning to have a liaison with a married woman, which was purely vocal, just occasionally talking and being with. Sometimes she came in my car. We went and parked in the country, and we just talk. We just talk, and I would take her back again because she was always trying to get home for reasons I won't go into. But she had obligations. She had a full-time job. She couldn't be out long. But I did fall in love with her, and the church found out about it, and I was summoned to a bishop's stake president's tribunal. And of course, that's where it all fell apart because I wasn't prepared to do what they wanted me to do. I did later, but at that moment, I wasn't ready. And I said to the stake president, sorry, let me bring that back. President, at this moment where you really want me to do things in your order of events now, I will be doing in a few months, I'm sure. So can you give me the grace and wait? And I should be able to report back to you a happy ending to this. And he said, "No, I have to do it now, and you have to stop this liaison now." So I fell out with him really, and I didn't want to go. And he kept literally badgering me. He kept phoning or writing. I said, "Well, I don't. What's the point of me coming? I've nothing to say. I know what you probably will do, but I have nothing. I see no reason to come." And he really wanted me to come. And then I started to think, well, if they're going to look at my life and what they think I'm up to, and I'm not there to put them straight in any way. In other words, they're going to air my laundry, and I want to be there to make sure they don't get anything wrong. So I did go in the end, and yeah, it ended in excommunication. And that was obviously the time when I stopped going officially. I did go back occasions because I had friends there, but generally speaking, that was 2006. That was about a year after my wife died, April the 5th or the 6th, I think. And then I stopped going.
It is fair to say that it was a very painful time for you and those people around you, um, as you left the church, and that culminated in the excommunication. Now, when we talked about this prior to doing this recording, you were talking to me about how people perceived that the reason that you were leaving the church was based around this excommunication event, but you've also described how emotionally perhaps you'd left the church long before that happened, although you were still attending physically. How did you feel as you were removed from the church, even though it wasn't something you had a testimony of and a belief in yourself at the time?
Yeah, I can tell you about that. Because I did not believe anymore, fundamentally. I mean, I know now that that was 2006. So here we are. It's like 20 odd years further on. And of course, I know now so much more about what is wrong, what is false about the church. Back then, I had enough idea and enough evidence to make me think this is not true. So, it's a different world now. I know more, and more has happened since then, like the gay policy or whatever. So it's different. It's different. But essentially, I still did not believe in the church as I understood it then. And I expected something to happen in that disciplinary thing. Because if they'd have said to me as they did, my problem was I was having the liaison. So they said, we want you to stop it. Will you do that? Now, if I had said, sorry, President, yes, I've decided I'm going to do it now. Thank you for helping me. They probably would have been fine. I would have been smacked on the wrist, would have to report to the bishop every week or month. And, it would have been all right. I would have kept my membership, I'm sure. But my problem was not the problem as they described it, i.e., the liaison. It was my defiance. Now, it wasn't nasty or funny or clever or arrogant. I just said, I can't do what you're asking me. I mean, one of the things said in the meeting was, do you know what? I can't believe it went on from 7:30 till midnight. I just can't believe where that time went. And I didn't know it was midnight until somebody told me. But at midnight, I was excommunicated. Before that, during the proceedings, this gentleman on the High Council, I don't know who it was, stood up and said to me, Brother Bridgestock, he's right down the back, this man is called of God. President Watson, he is a Lord's mouthpiece in this area of England. Are you telling me he has told you to stop this communication? Are you telling me that you're not prepared to do what the Lord wants? That was his tone. I have to laugh about this. Well, I think about it. And I stood there without any emotion and said, I don't believe he is the mouthpiece of God. I don't believe he communicates with God. I don't believe that he represents God for my life. Uh, so I don't see any relevance in what he asked me to do. So I am defying them in the nicest possible way. I am saying, I'm not prepared to do what you want me to do. I don't care what you're saying because I don't believe you. That was it. However, I did not foresee the emotional consequence of what happened at midnight. Now, at midnight, he stood up when he came back in from his last council with his councillors. So he was absent and we waited. I was probably waiting in another room, and then I was called in for the final judgment, the sentence. And he comes in with his councillors, very solemn, and he says, Brother Robert Bridgestock, we have come to the decision to excommunicate you. God will not be mocked. And those were his words. God will not be mocked. I tell you what, I could write a book on the last sentence. I could write forever about that phrase. I've got a chapter about my excommunication, so I could talk about that later. But there is in there a response, and I'm just going to read a small part of it. When the judgment was pronounced upon me, the sadness inside felt as bad as the moment I watched my wife die. It was a profound moment of love being lost. I felt very alone at the very moment and needing not less love, but more. When I stood before this disciplinary council, I was already dead. That is, I already had the experience of death, of my faith in Mormonism. I knew I was dead because when at midnight I heard the stake president announce my excommunication, followed by the words, God will not be mocked. At that moment I knew, according to Mormonism, that my beautiful, lovely wife, Norma, having died a year earlier, was severed and separated from me for all eternity. And yet, not one single nerve ending flinched, not one emotional cell in my body trembled on the Richter scale. Here was my emotional proof that my intellectual conviction that the church was false was substantiated, and that their absurd dogma of separation or segregation of families forever was utterly bloody nonsense. You would have thought, because I no longer believed, that standing there and hearing their verdict would be a mere formality of indifference. Not so. Believing the church is false does not cause indifference to disciplinary threats. My emotional response was vastly different. I felt I was now being discarded, dumped, disposed of, or buried. One might call excommunication the second death, the confirmation that you have died. Even as I write about it here, and this often happens to me, my eyes are swimming with tears. I remember the sense of utter abandonment. Indeed, as this meeting finished and people shuffled papers and slowly stood up to go, isolation overwhelmed me. The man in me had gone, and all the strength, inner confidence, and self esteem I ever had drained away to nothing. Suddenly, I was a little boy again, that little boy at school who got repeatedly smacked on the legs because he could not read. I felt brutalized, broken, and so that was my emotional response, despite the fact that I knew that it was irrelevant, that there was no such thing as a council of God. There were just men playing God. But nevertheless, I think it was the sense of the church was always my mother. You know, the mother is the one that cares for you. Remember, I said to you about the mission president putting his arm around me. The beginning of this bubble of love, this tribe, this family, this extended, marvelous, congregation of people that cared and loved you and would support you and would counsel you through the years as they did. Suddenly, it's all taken away in my head. And I was that little boy again. And I felt something wrong with this place. There's something wrong with being here and going through this and ending like this. And he was so, I think, worried about me. He said, Bob, can we, everybody's going home now, but can you and I and my counsellors just pop into another room so this goes on? And we go into another room are you all right? I said, yeah, I'm fine, but of course I wasn't really. Brother Santo here, my counsellor, wants to talk to you. And he started telling me about the importance of getting a confirmation from the Spirit that I've been excommunicated. God has done it. It's not us as men, it's God. And he talked about an experience he had where he went through something very similar where he needed a confirmation. I don't mean a counsel like that. And he went home and prayed, and sure enough, he got his confirmation. No, he said to me, Bob, Brother Bridgestock, you can have this confirmation. And they didn't say you have to jump through hoops, you have to do things, and it will come in a few weeks. They said, go home and pray, and God will give you a confirmation. The other counsellor confirmed it. The stake president confirmed the promise and said, God will tell you. Okay, so what do? I go home. And you know something? Again, we go back to this man who doesn't think his opinions are always correct. I believe what I'm doing. I believe the church is false, but perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I could just try this once to do what they say. There's no harm in it. So that week I prayed every day. I tried. I tried sometimes when I prayed. I fasted one day. I asked God, is this your will? What's this to do with you? Nothing. Whole week praying. Nothing. Not a shred of confirmation came to me. So that tells you something about the whole church. I've had that happen again. That's happened twice about something else as well. Nothing at all. Nothing.
Yeah.
One of the last call-ins. So go on, you carry on.
No, I was just going to say, one of the things about the church does is provide an answer to a problem that nobody in the world, no other faith is even aware of, and that is the idea of separation of family in the eternities. No one I know outside the church can even envisage the idea that a loving God would separate a family in the eternities and that they wouldn't be together. The church provides a solution to a problem that it tells us exists and then uses that, and we're seeing this in the example given, to punish us. And that is very painful. That is very painful. As I listen to you read those words, Bob, and those feelings and those emotions, knowing that the woman that you had spent, well, you were married in the early 70s, late 60s, and this is now the 2000s, that you spent many years with, that you built a life with, that you raised a family with, that you were being told that God would separate her from you for the eternities, is wrong. And the church is the only place that I know that creates the problem to give a solution and then use that solution to control
Yeah,
the
that's what I
way that we
think.
act.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then you know, this is me for the purpose of the audience. Actually, I'm very nuanced in my beliefs, and this is not about me attacking the church. As I've always stated, as I've done these podcasts, this is about exploring our own journeys and giving us our own tools to be able to decide whether, if we're going to stay in the church, whether that is how we do that. And it's not about trying to encourage people to leave the church or stay, as much as understand what the gospel teaches and the informed consent around that. But I have to say, we've got an example in this conversation of someone who has been through painful experiences, has lost his wife, has been through some really painful, traumatic experiences, and made some choices that have hurt him and his family along the way, if we're fair. But to be punished like this is hard. And I'm going to shut up now, Bob. I just felt I needed to express that and my love for you as you express those feelings that you felt that time 20 years ago, despite the fact that your faith was at its lowest ebb, despite the fact that you no longer had a testimony of the gospel, that you still supported your family, that you still attended church, that you still supported your daughter, that you sustained your stake president enough to turn up to this meeting, that you listened to him, and then to go away and follow his counsel and pray about what he asks you to do, and as you said, receive no answer. And there's some real thoughts about that and about how that actually plays out in the true Church of Jesus Christ. Sorry, Bob, I interrupted you. I interrupted you.
It is a strange phenomenon that I never dreamed I would feel emotionally the way I did. I mean, how would it feel if I had been a strong member and succumbed to temptation and committed adultery and I'm excommunicated and everything would have been absolutely terrible. I mean, it was that bad. It was that bad in there, in my heart, that it was second to my wife dying. And if that wasn't enough, I get this letter from the stake president a few days later, and it's about 5 or 6 pages long, and the whole thing is fire and brimstone. I mean, from start to finish, it's couched in loving phraseology like, "We love you, Bob, Brother Bridgestock, and we wish the Lord's blessings upon you, and we don't say this to hurt you." And then it goes into the next fire and brimstone lecture, quotations, scriptures that talk about hell and talk about separation forever from your family. I mean, the whole thing is an abuse. And I suspect something like this is quite common with many stake presidents, trying to get you, fear-mongering, to be so frightened and so afraid of the consequences. And you get that in the temple when we used to have, I don't know if he still does it, Satan appearing. And if people do not live up to every covenant they make in this temple this day, they will be in my power. It's like that. It's like this thing has got Satan all over it. It's got Satan written on every single other line. Satan, Satan, Satan. And I'm thinking, I mean, it was when I got that, I laughed and put it in the proverbial bin. I kept it. But I didn't even read it. I glanced at bits. I thought, oh, for God's sake. I took it as a joke, really, a kind of bad joke. I thought, well, that's what church does. It does things like that. But really, when you think about it, it's pretty shocking stuff. It's pretty bad.
Yep.
Where's the love? Where's the real love?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it didn't have any effect on me because I had this God inside me. Now things have changed. I don't go to church. I don't read the Bible. I don't read scripture. I do keep going back fairly regularly to ex-Mormon sites, and I've made a pretty big contribution over the years to other people and their problems. But I don't do anything religious at all. I just don't pray even. But the strange thing is, as I said to my brother, because he is my twin brother, David. He's followed me. He's gone from being strong in the church, and we've argued about it endlessly, in the nicest possible way with emails. He lives 200 miles away. He lives in the same street as the temple, the Surrey temple. He lives in West Park Road. He's got an estate down there of 20 acres and a big house, and he's just a lovely prophet. We were able to be direct, frank with each other about dogma, and he, in his defense of it, blunt, frank, etc. But because we have such a deep love, neither of us was offended, because he is more important than the dogma, and I am more important than my apostate condition. And I would never worry if he stayed a Mormon or came out, because he's the person I love. I don't love his religion. I don't love the fact that he could be like me, and he feels the same about me. He doesn't give a damn whether I'm apostate. He loves me as a person, because we haven't changed. Although my family might think I've changed, other people might, but we haven't. And so the thing is with David, we stopped by an agreement talking about the church. Not completely, but this project we had with each other. Each other was a project. So he would help me. I'd try and help him. He'd try and help me. I mean, he never got anywhere. So we gave up. I left him on his own. And then he carried on searching. And then one day his shelf broke. And he said to me, yeah, I just started sending him things. And I thought, oh, he won't like that. He won't like that. He'll be critical. He came back and said, absolutely amazing. Couldn't agree more with you. I started seeing an ex-Mormon, but of course he's got things to sort out, and he's got a delicate balance with his family and what he does and doesn't do right now. So he's kind of in transition. And I was going to say something about that. It's gone out of my head. He still believes in Christ. That's what it is. He still believes in Christ. So he's gone off on a tangent. He's sort of dumped the church in his mind and his heart, but he's still got Christ. Now, I remember reading this book by Lynn Picknack. She's an ex-Mormon, The Mask of Christ. She is an author of many books. She's been on television. She's a historian in her own right. And she's an ex-Mormon. And I met her in London. I went down to London and I met her. We had dinner together. And Lynn, in her book, talks about the magician Christ and talks about ancient religions. And I began to think, yeah, I think you're right. Christ probably wasn't Jesus. He was a magician. And here I am listening to our brother talking about Christ these days. And you know what? I still feel what he's saying, because of the associations I've had and the prayers and my own experiences outside of church. I mean, the church helped me get there, I could say, directly and indirectly. Enos went into the woods and prayed. I started doing the same thing. I got my own experience of what I felt was God. Now, it may not have been, but when he talks about Christ, I think about the New Testament and my teachings when I was very young about Jesus, and going to see some of the big dramas about the crucifixion. I used to cry through it. I used to cry through the film of Jesus being crucified. I take it very seriously. I've always believed it, you see. So when I think of this, I think Jesus may never have been resurrected. He's probably still dead of dust somewhere in Jerusalem, scattered to the wind. Some sort of bloke that had ideas and they didn't materialize, and he's gone, and everybody started a religion after him. And so my brother's talking about all this and saying, I still believe in Christ. And I say, do you know what? I still believe too. Do you know what I think? I think in my heart, I'm thinking, if there was a God, and I sort of think there is, if there is a God, because of the experiences I've had, I believe that he's something like the man that I used to know, the New Testament Jesus. So when David talks about Jesus, I can identify with his soul, with his heart, because inside me, I still think it's on fire. It's still there, but it's not associated with the Bible. Not really. Certainly not with the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, and the ruddy prophets of the Mormon. I don't have any association or contact or connection between what I feel inside. And as I said to you before, Dan, I think I am a soft atheist, because if there's two people talking on telly and one's an atheist and they're having an argument with a Christian, I always fall in the camp of the atheist, because I think Christians are naive. So I'm not naive. I don't think I'm naive. I think I may be wrong about God, and it could just be something that happened inside me. But nobody's proved it. No, certain things have happened to me in my life to do with connections with my wife after dying. I don't know how it happened. I don't know how she did what she did, but I've had messages. Now, I don't know how science could explain it. So I still have this feeling that there's another life and that she's out there, which is kind of comforting. But if somebody could come today and say, right, Bob, these are the reasons this happened to you, scientifically speaking, medically speaking, biologically speaking, this has happened to you for these reasons. And I sat back and thought, do you know what? You've got a point there. And if I could substantiate this and read more about it and understand it, I'd be quite not unreluctant to just adopt it as a new truth, because I'm not afraid of truth like I was as a Mormon. Those disturbances I felt when I first read that pamphlet about Joseph Smith, this shuddering, this movement in my belief. And when I came out of the church, it just disappeared. When I was a strong member, all the while I was strong and didn't allow questions and doubts to be entertained, there was this shuddering, this disturbance, fear, really. And that's why they don't go there. That's why they don't read stuff. That's why they don't listen to the person in the family who's got something to say about their religion. They don't want to hear it. It's too scary. They may be wrong. And that massive life investment, all their money, all their time, all their dreams, all their visions, everything they've accomplished, all the talks they've given, everything, all their value system is tied up in a religion that somehow could be at any given moment in question if they read the article or listen to somebody's point of view. So, yeah, it's disappeared. I am free to believe whatever comes to me, and I'm not frightened. I am not afraid anymore to adopt any truth, even if it means I can no longer believe in God. I so admire the atheists in the ex-Mormon world. They're such good people, such marvelous Christians, and yet they're atheists, loving people, kind people, decent people, people that go and do things because they feel love, not because they feel commanded or afraid of not getting eternal life or worry that they might displease a prophet if they don't talk to their neighbor. You have genuineness outside the church that you don't have inside, because there is this. Well, it's another part of what I wanted to say, which is about the conditioning of Mormons. They don't have the capacity to think about reality as it really is. They are skewed and distorted, so that they certainly can't entertain the idea the church is false. One of the things I find ironic is that if somebody said to me, Bob, right now, Bob, this God business that you still believe in, do you think it's possible that you might be wrong? I say, well, I don't think I am wrong. Do you think there's a chance in 100 you're wrong? Well, no, I think I'll stick with the 1 out of 100. I think I'll go with that, because most people haven't had what I've had. I haven't seen a Mormon in my life anywhere from my brother who has had the experiences that I've had. So that says something. That means that lot out there in the Mormon church don't really know what I've been through. So I know I'll stick with my chances. 1 in 1,000, I'll probably go with that. Well, what about 1 in a billion? 1 in a million, 1 in a trillion. Do you think you could be wrong about God? I said, I have to hold my hands up. Yes, I could easily be wrong because the chances are stacking up against me, 1 in a million. But if I say, this is the difference, I can go with the possibility that I am wrong. I could go with the possibility that I'm wrong about the church, and the church is true, I got it wrong. 1 in a billion, 1 in 2 billion, yeah, could have got it wrong.
Yeah.
I admit that. But if I say to a Mormon who's active and orthodox, what's the chances your church is false? They'd say, none. None. Well, what about a chance in 1,000? No, don't be silly. What about a chance in 10 million? Bob, there's not a chance in hell. It's false. There's no, I cannot even equate or relate to the question. It's not a sensible question. It's a nonsense question because it can't be true. It can't happen. It's true. And I mean, that is perhaps it's an unconscious arrogance, but it is such an extreme arrogance to be able to say that there's no possibility it could be false or wrong, or that there was no gold plates, real gold plates. I find this ironic. I can do this. I can admit that I'm wrong, but Mormons can't. What does that tell you? Yeah.
And I think that's a really good question to leave hanging, is and to not answer and allow audience that are viewing this to ponder, what does this tell you? When you listen to stories like Bob has shared with us today, and when you look at your experiences and how you deal with testimony with faith, with truth, what does that tell you? I'd like to pick back on one thing that you said, Bob, and I've written it down while we've been talking, and I think it is a really powerful statement. I'm not afraid of truth like I was when I was a Mormon. I think that's very powerful. Bob, we've been talking for quite a long time now, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate the time that you've given us today. Very briefly, I know that you wrote a book. I mentioned right at the outset, the book in 2014 you published The Youngest Bishop in England. And my understanding is that you're working on a revision of that book at the moment. If I was
Yeah.
someone who may be listening, go on. Yep. Go on.
Okay. No, it's okay. I'm following what you're saying. But there
Yeah.
was
If I
such a
was,
lot I was going to say. Yeah, God,
if I,
we can't possibly do it here. I've
yeah,
got
if
I got the book from that could be obtained on Amazon, but I fell out with the publisher because I wrote. It's called The Youngest Bishop in England. Now, I wrote 140,000 words. The publisher was an atheist. He wrote books on anarchism. He was an anarchist publisher. His friend committed suicide, who was gay, who was a member of the church, and he hated the church. And he was going to pick up anything that was anti-Mormon. So he published my book. But he didn't like my spirituality within the book. And I think he was quite arrogant as well. He knocked it down to 70,000, which is half the book. So I fell out with him. I don't get paid for it. The contract's just ruined. He reneged on his contract anyway. So I just left him behind. He's left me behind. He still sells it. Probably makes a little bit of money. Probably won't make much, but he still sells that book. But if you're watching and you are thinking, I wouldn't mind reading this book, can I tell you that I have revised it a couple of times? It now goes back up to 134,000 words, so it's a bit longer. But what this one doesn't contain is my soul. My new revision, which I've called Beneath the Surface of Mormonism, it contains my heart and my soul. So, you don't have to pay for it. What I'm saying is, I don't know if you could see that there. Can you see that? That's got
I'll
my
make sure we
name.
put that in the show notes, Bob, so that if anyone wants to contact you, they can. I will make
So,
sure
but
that those details are available to them.
yeah, so I've got my email at the top. I've got my Facebook now. If you went on
Yeah.
Facebook, you would find out that you can private message me and I will send you the link. So that's easier to remember. You can make a note of it, Robbie Bridgestock or robert.bridgestock@sky.com, and I will reply to you if it's an email and send you the link, or I will send it via Messenger on Facebook. So
Thanks
that
for that.
really
Thanks
sort
for
of
that, Bob.
sorts out the revision. There are some photos in there of this young lady who I married. I was gonna show you that. This is Marilyn, who I'm now with. She's absolutely gorgeous. This was taken 7 years ago. She's just the same today. She hasn't aged, but I am getting older. So this is the one that I've been with for the last 17 years, who I met after Norma, and it's been marvelous. And one of the things that the stake president said to me in this horrible letter, he said, quote, "Bob, your life after this will be a misery." I don't know where the misery is. I haven't felt it. And that's one of the actual biggest, ironically, the stupidest thing that the Mormons would say, because they're taught by their leaders to say it, and it's programmed into them that to walk away from Mormonism will mean that their life is unhappy, that they will never have joy. Even President Nelson said fairly recently, there's no such thing as real joy outside of the faith of Mormonism. What a stupid thing to say. I've had an incredible, I've been blessed with money. I've been blessed with health and strength. I've been happy. It's been vibrant. I haven't lost my personality. All outside of Mormonism. And even when I was caught in and I had all those frustrations, I felt so guilty, so bad, because we didn't actually have sex with my wife, but we had this struggle to remain, as the church would call it, morally pure. And so I had terrible guilt, terrible feelings God hated me or I was evil, or that the church goes so much on about sexuality that one becomes paranoid about one's ordinary natural self. So the point is that I took all this forward thinking, oh my goodness, how am I going to deal with my life because I've done some of these things that I shouldn't have done? And the answer is just evaporates, because I'm in love with a woman. They just evaporate because you're still a person that has love, has capacity, has generosity, has patience, has kindness, has perseverance, has aptitude and gifts to promote love, to keep love going, to make life successful, to find a business in life. All these things happen regardless of the fearmongers who used to say, you'll have a scar for the rest of your life, or you'll be damaged for the rest of your life. You'll always carry this burden. It's absolutely, I was going to say a expletive, but I won't. It's absolutely false to believe that you cannot find happiness beyond Mormonism. So I think I'll end with that.
Thank you. Thank you. Just uh, just two very quick things. If you were to find 17-year-old Robbie Bridgestock today, when he sat in his office in London and someone is offering him a copy of the Book of Mormon, what advice would you give him?
What advice?
What advice would you give your 17-year-old self?
I would say, because then I don't know if there was the online availability, but I'd say you better be very careful, because it's a lot deeper than what they tell you. They will tell you what they want you to know, but there is much information within Mormonism that is not available to the missionaries or to the public at large, which is kept in the vaults in the Granite Canyon in Salt Lake. It is spurious, it is dangerous, it is concealed for the reason that it will destroy your potential testimony. So they only tell you so much. They only want you to know so much. So don't take my word for that. Go online and look at Mormonism. You don't have to go to anti-Mormon sites. You go to church history. If you don't want to touch Mormon sites, ex-Mormon sites, that's fine. Go and look at church history. Look at the discourses of Brigham Young. Look at the discourses of Joseph Fielding Smith and find out the background to what these men believed and find out about, look online for historians' books about polygamy. You'll drop it like a ton of bricks. You know, it's the sort of thing. Go online, read books. Don't believe everything the missionaries tell you because they're too young, too delusional, too skewed, too distorted, too conditioned to know about their culture.
Thank you. Okay, Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I feel that there's the things you shared today have given me some real thoughts and some things that I want to ponder on in my life. So thank you very much for your time.
It's been great, Dan.
You talked about your book. Dan. Yeah, sorry. You've talked about your book and how you're kind of to make that available to anyone who'd like to read it. I will make sure that the email address and contact details in the show notes that accompany this on YouTube, so that people are able to click on that to find those and get in contact if you want to. Okay, so that they can reach out to you. It's a story. It's a story. You and like I said, I know people that know and love you, Bob. All right. They knew and loved you in the church. They know and love you outside of the church. And I really want to thank you for coming and talking to myself and to whoever is watching this today. I asked about advice to your 70-year-old. I'm going to give the last words to you, and once you finish what you're going to say, I will end the stream. All right. Talk to those people that are watching this who have doubts and concerns, who have grown up in the church, are converts to the church, but have questions and concerns and are trying to resolve their thoughts in their own mind. What would you say to them?
I'm going to say that it's extremely difficult to take, for instance, I've got it here. I read this book when I was an active Mormon. No Man Knows My History, and when I read it, it was water off a duck's back. I couldn't absorb the criticism about Mormonism. I mean, very incredible book, but I didn't feel disturbed by it because I was too conditioned, too slanted, I would say brainwashed, because there's another word for it. And it's easy to dismiss these words because this is a very slow drip, drip, drip. It happens slowly over many months and years, but you slowly take on the persona, the ethos, the conditions of Mormonism, its culture, what it wants you to think, feel, say, and value. Then I read it again when I was much more open-minded, able to think critically, because I had grown up and gone through life a bit, coming toward the end of my working life. I read it again and I couldn't believe what I was reading. It's as if I had never read the first one. So what I'm trying to say is, you don't know if you are a member. And that doesn't matter whether you're 17-year-old or 77. If you feel orthodox, and you're saying genuinely, what is it that I should be afraid of? Why should I even look outside? Why should I look beyond this? I would say because you do not realize how skewed, distorted your mind has become. Your stock answers, the way you feel, the way you think, is cultivated by Mormon theology, dogma, policy. Everything is just coming in at you for week after week after week, and you do not know how wrong you are. And it's very difficult to break free. So I think you have to say to yourself, there is a possibility I may be wrong. And for instance, if I said to you, if I say to the listeners, what is there so bad about Mormonism that should make me afraid or think that it's somehow changing my opinion of how I should treat you or how I should treat research into whether it's true? Why should I even bother? It's a wonderful church. But if I was to say to you, there is the grenade, the explosive device that would shatter your world if your son, if you're a mother in Mormonism, or if you're a father, your son, your wife, your grandchild, decided that they've finished with the church and you love them to death. You've always thought of them in that celestial kingdom with you because you're all going there, all sealed together forever. But let's just say your wife and your son and some of your children fall away from the church and become apostate. The condition and the emotion and the mentality, the attitude and feeling you would have about the grenade and the explosion of their loss, because they will be separated from you forever. Maybe in this life too, some of them. But in eternity, they are banished from you. You may go to heaven if you're active, you think. They can never see you again. They can never be with you. So you have this explosion, this dynamite, and it creates a heightened, severe, extended, catastrophic emotional response in your soul. So if your son says, I don't want to go to church anymore, Dad, and you blow your top, or he gives you reasons why he can't stand the church, and you get angry, or you get angry with somebody because they're a friend and they're doing the same thing. You get angry, more angry, because you're a Mormon than you would outside the church. So if somebody's committing fornication in your family and you come down on them like a ton of bricks in the church excommunication, you will feel terrible about. You'd love them, but you'll feel worse because you're a Mormon, because they're going to be separated and they have to come back, and you can't control them because they've decided not to come back. So you are left with incredibly heightened, high raised levels of nation, repugnance, guilt, anger, because you happen to be a Mormon. I'm telling you, a religion that makes you feel like that and has, as my interviewer has said, has that power over you is wrong. So you need to be careful, and you need to have the capacity and the humility to say, I shouldn't be afraid just to inquire. There's no question of Satan grabbing hold of you. You won't suddenly be struck or dumb or diseased because you've read something that says something derogatory about the church. Think about Jesus and what he said to the Pharisees. Think about what he said critically about the religious elite. He said they are as a whited sepulchre. Do you know what that is, a whited sepulchre? It's a sepulchre that's got a clean out of body. It's like a sharp suit of the Mormon general authorities. Very clean, smart appearance. And so the religious elite of Jesus' days were smart, clever men. He says they are like a sepulchre. Well, I've been in the funeral business, and I can tell you, I left because of the smell of the dead. It is the most atrocious stench I have ever encountered in my life. I would crawl through sewers to avoid that smell. And Jesus said in his day derogatory remarks to general leaders of the elite, religious elite of his day. So you have to say to yourself, you shouldn't be afraid like Jesus, just to search and find something out about these elite, because Jesus had the capacity to say they smell rotten dead bodies. So you're not in bad company to investigate something, even if you think they don't want you to. But I laid it on thick there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bob. It's been a real pleasure having you on the podcast today. My name's Beyond Belief. It's been a pleasure this afternoon, and I will see you on the next episode.